Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, June 29th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the state of Georgia. Now, you may or may not have heard about this brand new poll that has come out from Quinnipiac University, showing Reverend Raphael Warnock with a 10-point lead over Herschel Walker in the U.S. Senate race. It's the same poll that is accompanied by a Georgia governor's number that shows Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams tied in the same exact race amongst the same exact respondents. Now, this is a very substantial poll because it shows the strength of Raphael Warnock's Democratic Senate abilities for 2022 and the inability for Stacey Abrams to do well in the governor election. But I don't buy it. At least I don't buy a 10-point lead for a Democratic candidate, though I wouldn't doubt that Raphael Warnock is ahead. I'll explain my reasoning, and we'll go through this poll and go through what we've seen so far from the Georgia Senate and governor race. But the main thing that you should automatically know straight off the bat is that Raphael Warnock typically outperforms Stacey Abrams regardless of the poll that you are looking at. So, for a bit of background and context, remind yourself that in Georgia, Joe Biden won the state of Georgia. In 2020, Joe Biden won the state of Georgia by 0.23%. It was amongst the narrowest of races. In fact, I believe Georgia might have been the closest election of the 2020 election cycle. And looking at the margin of victory for Biden, you had over 5 million votes cast actually across the entire state, which Joe Biden was able to get 2,473,000 votes to Donald Trump's 2,461,000. So it was a very, very close race. It came down to the wire. It took 4 days to actually get a final call in the state of Georgia. And by the end of it, we knew who had won, but it was by no means a landslide or an exceptional victory in the sense of margin for the incumbent president of the United States. But now we're back. Because in this presidential election, it actually coincided with the Senate election in the state of Georgia. Now, we don't have the results for the initial results, but we have the special election final tally, which shows that Raphael Warnock defeated Senator Kelly Loeffler by 2 percentage points across the state. It was a very high turnout election. In fact, the runoff elections in Georgia outperformed and outpaced the 2016 presidential election when it came down to overall turnout across the state. Georgia voted in droves and elected Raphael Warnock to the U.S. Senate by 2 percentage points when Donald Trump and Joe Biden in their race had only seen a margin by about a significantly lesser amount. You're talking less than a quarter of a percentage versus 2 whole percentage points between Raphael Warnock and Kelly Loeffler. But now, like I said, we're back into the Senate race with Raphael Warnock. For those of you who are wondering how this race actually came to be, I will tell you the Georgia Senate race that Raphael Warnock won originally was a special election. It was meant to finish Johnny Isakson's term. He first won his re-election bid back in 2016, chose to retire in 2019. Brian Kemp nominated a Republican to the U.S. Senate to replace Johnny Isakson, and then eventually we headed off into this runoff and special election for 2020, and that's how Raphael Warnock was elected. So when he was elected, he was pushed to finish the final 2 years of Isakson's term, and now we are there right now. So looking at the numbers that we have seen thus far, the polls seem to tell us that the story of this race is that it goes back and forth. But take a look at the timestamps and the dates that these polls were taken. The last poll that shows that Herschel Walker wins this race is in April 1st through April 3rd. It was a Hill Emerson College poll that showed Walker with a 4-point lead across the state. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution, as you can see back in January of 2022, show Herschel Walker ahead by 3 points. But in every poll following, including the one today that Walker's campaign released, we'll get into that in a little bit, but looking at all of the polls that we have seen thus far, the worst result that I have seen for Raphael Warnock is a tie. And we've seen one with a 5-point lead. We've seen one now with a 10-point lead. And that tells you that this race seems to be turning in favor of Raphael Warnock versus where it was maybe a couple of months back. But looking at the governor's race, it's a bit trickier because Brian Kemp, in the same polls that you show Raphael Warnock ahead, is winning across the state. On one hand, he's tied in the most recent one, but in all 4 polls prior to the one released today from Quinnipiac University, you see that Brian Kemp leads across Georgia by 7 points, 7 points again, 5 points, 5 points. He hasn't been impacted in the way that Walker's numbers have seemed to dissipate in the state of Georgia. Brian Kemp has held strong across the state and now averages at a 4.8% lead, despite the Senate race, again on the same ballot with the same respondents, averaging at a 1.6% lead for the Democrat. That's about 6 to 7% of voters that are crossing the aisle to vote for a different party in the Senate election than in the governor election. And it's very, very fascinating, and it tells us a bit about candidate quality, candidate electability, and where our national standpoint looks like for the 2022 Senate elections. So let's go ahead and dive deeper into this one poll from Quinnipiac, because there are many people talking about it, because it shows a substantial lead for the incumbent senator in Georgia. So Quinnipiac University currently has an A- rating from FiveThirtyEight. They've called 82% of races correctly, but that doesn't mean that they always call the margins correctly. Quinnipiac University has a pretty interesting history. On one hand, they're sometimes within their margin of error, but in most cases, they're not. And in almost all cases, they are overestimating the amount of Democratic support. And that's what I was saying. Within the first few minutes of this video, I told you that I did not trust this number from Quinnipiac University. In no reality would I expect there to be a 10-point lead for Raphael Warnock. What I could believe is a 3-point lead. What I could believe is a 2-point lead. 4 would be pushing it. 1 could also be realistic. Anything between a Walker plus 3 victory to a Warnock plus 3 victory, I would be believing it. But a 10-point victory, absolutely not. And we can see that in terms of where Quinnipiac University had been before. Sometimes they were off by as much as 12 points, and other times they were off by as little as 3.6%. It really just depends on the state, depends on the race, but as I said previously, almost always underestimating the amount of Republican support within a state. Democrats should hope that Quinnipiac University is off by their average amount, somewhere around 6 to 7% across their states, meaning that the results show that even with a 6 to 7 point shift, that Warnock still wins his Senate race and Democrats maintain control of the U.S. Senate. It's wishful thinking, but also potentially practical following the decision from the United States Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. Because what we saw in Nebraska and what we've seen in terms of national polling data and statewide polling data, there does seem to be a negative impact for the GOP as a result of the Dobbs decision. It's not substantial enough that this now turns into a blue wave year. No one is arguing that. But what we are arguing that is in races such as this one, that could be as close as they were in 2020 or as close as the presidential margin was in 2020, that every single vote matters. Had the election gone slightly differently in 2020, Donald Trump would have won re-election. Despite him losing the popular vote by 4.5%, all Donald Trump needed was 44,000 more votes across 3 key swing states, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Arizona. You needed 11,000 in Georgia, you needed a similar amount in Arizona, and you needed about 20,000 votes in Wisconsin. Together that added up and totaled to less than 44,000 votes that, had they gone again in a different direction, had flipped or just been added to Donald Trump's vote share, he would have been reelected president. He might have lost the popular vote by 6-7 million votes, but he came so close to winning re-election because every vote matters. Warnock is not up by 10, but I do believe that he is up. And as a response to this poll, I am confirmed in this belief from a poll that has come from Herschel Walker's own campaign. It's an internal poll that shows Warnock and Walker tied. Brian Kemp is up by 6. Keep in mind what we're looking at here. This is an internal poll. This is done and made for the Walker campaign. If the Walker campaign can only find themselves in dead heat with Raphael Warnock, what does that tell you about where the race currently stands? If nonpartisan pollsters are putting the Democrats ahead in Georgia, and a Republican internal is showing it tied, you shift it over to the left slightly, and you find yourself about at a Warnock victory of 2, 3, 4 points across the state, at least where it stands right now. And again, as I said previously, that is not unbelievable, because it has happened and possibly can happen in November. The Quinnipiac poll, I think, will hold some also interesting results when you take a look at the crosstabs. Let's go ahead and make sure that it actually takes us to what we want to see. But they ask questions beyond the simple Senate and governor question that show you that these numbers can hold up in terms of where it's being compared to. You might think, okay, if this poll is showing the Democrats ahead by 10 points, where do these voters stand on Biden? Where do these voters stand on the approval of Brian Kemp, on the approval of Raphael Warnock? Where do they stand? Because if Walker is losing by 10 points and Biden is potentially tied or even within the state, it would make sense that these numbers are unreliable, unpredictable, and that this sample is just completely off and wrong. But that's not what you see. When you take a look at the presidential race, the favorability that we see, let's go ahead and find right here. Joe Biden has a negative 33 to 60% job approval rating across the state, meaning that in the state of Georgia, 27 more voters disapprove of the job that Joe Biden is doing in Washington, D.C. This is negative 27%. That is horrible. That is abysmal for the president. Yet somehow, the Democrats are still doing well in the state. Abrams is tied. Warnock is up by 10. Looking at these numbers, it shows me that Biden might be down, but that doesn't mean that voters are automatically shifting to the Republican Party. It's unlike what we've ever seen in modern American politics. We rarely ever see an unpopular incumbent to this extent having such little impact on the electability of down-ballot candidates in a midterm that should otherwise be a red wave. I still think it will be a red wave. I am standing by that. But I've seen political pundits float the idea that the Roe v. Wade decision, the Dobbs decision, is going to be similar to the Republican Party's Kavanaugh effect. What does that mean? Well, despite the House of Representatives in 2018 going to the Democratic Party for the first time in 8 years, what we had seen happen was that in the Senate election that coincided with it, the Democratic Party actually lost seats. And that's what Republicans and pundits had said was a result of the Kavanaugh effect. There were Democratic senators that voted against the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh. Regardless of their reasoning, Trump voters and Trump supporters were angry with them, and thus turned out in ways that weren't exactly expected in the midterm elections. In many other states, they voted blue, but in these red states where there were incumbent Democratic representatives, or even swing states, Republican voters voted for the GOP even if they were displeased for President Trump, because they thought that these Senate elections would continue to hinder the GOP's ability to confirm their justices in the U.S. Supreme Court. And they were absolutely correct. Should Democrats have won control of the Senate in 2018, Ruth Bader Ginsburg would have been replaced under President Joe Biden. The Democrats would have expanded their Senate majority. The filibuster would likely be gone. So many things would have been different had the Democrats just won control of the Senate in 2018. But it was near impossible. They were defending 10 Democratic seats in states that were won by President Trump 2 years prior, and they didn't lose that many by the end of it. But the Kavanaugh effect, as many pundits argue, was very real. In states such as Indiana, states such as Missouri, states such as North Dakota, when there was such a pushback on Kavanaugh's confirmation by Senate Democrats, it gave all Senate Democrats a bad rep. Same thing with Joe Manchin in West Virginia. Same thing with Jon Tester in Montana. They got lucky. They made it through re-election by a very narrow margin. The same can't be said for many other Democrats who were impacted so heavily by that Kavanaugh vote. Impacted so heavily by the Republican Party's energized base as a result of it. It wasn't enough, as I said with Roe v. Wade and as I said with the House of Representatives, to prevent Republicans from losing control of the House in 2018. But it was enough to gain seats in the U.S. Senate. And that's something that we could potentially see or expect in the upcoming midterms. Because Georgia, if it was to change on my prediction map, Democrats will actually gain seats in the U.S. Senate. I haven't had the Democratic Party gaining seats since all the way back, let's go ahead and see here, in August of 2021. This was over half a year ago. And the Democrats were still expected to win Georgia, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Arizona, and Nevada. Now I don't expect them to win half of them. But the interesting thing about it all is that this decision, this Dobbs effect is what we've called it thus far, does seem to be having an impact. Because looking at the numbers that the Walker campaign released, you don't have a post-Dobbs poll done by this internal polling company. This is pre-decision from the Supreme Court. And I guarantee you, voters on the Republican side are not gaining support, or Republican candidates are not gaining support following a decision that 60% of Americans thinks is a step backwards. This poll that was done by Quinnipiac was done much more recently than the numbers done on the one from the Walker campaign. So looking at these new Georgia numbers, the Democrats in the Senate should be happier. But in the governor election, we're really not seeing much luck for Stacey Abrams. At the end of the day, the numbers have been consistent. Warnock can be up and Abrams can be down. It's not as simple as it was back in 2020, where you were voting for Biden, you were voting for Warnock, you were voting for Ossoff, and so on, and continuing on. That's not how it seems to be working in the state of Georgia this election cycle. There seems to be a significant portion of voters that are splitting, and that makes sense. If you take a look at the job approval rating for President Biden, it's down. But for Governor Brian Kemp, it's up by 5 points statewide. It's very difficult to convince voters to vote against someone that they like. It's easy to get them to vote for someone they do like. That's the case here. They like Kemp, they like Warnock, and they're being open to re-electing them regardless of what the national environment might be saying. Donald Trump railed against Brian Kemp and propped up Herschel Walker. As he went in the primary, it looks like he might go 0-2 again in the general election. Of course, Donald Trump never wants Stacey Abrams to win, but I can tell you right now, he's very spiteful about Brian Kemp. But voters in Georgia seem to be again disregarding the wishes of President Trump and voting against exactly how he might expect or how he might want in the state. It's fascinating to see this pushback on President Trump's choices and President Trump's picks, and I don't think it's a result necessarily of President Trump. But he certainly has had some bad luck within the state of Georgia, and Democrats in the Senate election within this race are probably very happy with these results, because the governor's race was almost always out of question once 2022 turned the tides in favor of the GOP. The Senate election very easily could have been out of question. But it's 100% in play for the Democratic Party, and it looks like momentarily at least that they are the favorites across the state of Georgia. It's not just the polls, it's also the political betting markets that changed drastically from last evening. We will see what happens this November. It will be quite a fascinating result to look at. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.